Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with some more extra credits. This time the First Opium War, the Righteous Minister, extra history number 2. Now I don't know which minister they're going to be talking about. Are they talking about the Prime Minister of the British? Or are we talking about the Minister to the Emperor of China? I don't know. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Alright. That's all out of the way. I don't think there's anything else to talk about here. Let's just go ahead and dive right in. Bum, 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 ba-da-da-bum.
Last we left off, the treasury of the British Empire was flowing into China, and the Honorable East India Company was still reeling under the staggering debt it owed the government for underwriting its military conquests in India. Something needed to be done.
What do?
They needed to find some tradable good, something other than silver, that the Chinese wanted to import to offset the massive costs of the Victorian need for tea. And the answer they found was opium. By the early 1800s, tea sales in England were unimaginably high. Given the quantity they were importing, the average English household spent about 5% of its income just on tea.
Britain, what the fuck, dude? Tea ain't that good. I mean, it's relaxing as fuck. Really soothing. And it's good, especially if you talk a lot. But
the government itself was
5%.
Basically propped up by the tea trade. Because the government had lent the Honorable East India Company so much money to conquer parts of India, and because a huge portion of the East India Company's revenue came from transporting tea from China, the country was even more dependent on the tea trade, as that revenue was being used not only to repay the debt the company had incurred, but to pay interest on it. But even as the tea craze was consuming England, the Honorable East India Company was also coming to the realization that their conquests in India weren't realizing the returns they'd hoped. Their plans to grow cotton in India had gone awry as cotton production in the Americas, and especially in Egypt, were on the rise. But it turns out that something else grew really well on all that land that they'd planned to use for cotton. Poppies. So the East India Company found its solution. They would grow poppies in India, convert them into opium, sell that at a profit in China, use the profit to buy tea, and then sell that at a profit back in Britain. There were only a
Step 1, grow some flowers. Step 2, make some drugs. Step 3, sell some drugs. Step 4, use profit from drugs to buy tea. Step 5, sell tea bought with drug profit for more profit.
few problems with this plan, besides the fact that it meant
See it yet? You need the drug part?
pushing drugs on an unheard of scale. There was also the issue that opium was technically illegal in China. And the Honorable East India Company, being of course the Honorable East India Company, would never do something illegal.
Totally.
Okay, they would, but they didn't want to risk
It's totally, yeah, like their conquest of India is totally legal.
getting kicked out of China or cut off from its tea. So they set up a market in Calcutta, basically the part of India closest to China that they controlled. And they said, anybody who wants to buy opium, we're selling it right here. No idea what you might want to do with it, but hey, that's not our business. Who wants some opium? Come on. And then they would let the smugglers handle it from there. So now you've got a bunch of dodgy characters selling drugs in the Middle Kingdom, basically backed by the largest corporation and the largest national economy in the world. And as Indian opium turned out to be even stronger than the domestically grown stuff, everybody wanted it.
Oh no.
So opium sales skyrocketed, and by 1835 they were moving roughly 3
Why is this giving me vibes similar to this South Sea bubble?
3,064,000 pounds of opium per year into China. And that number was only going to get bigger, because in 1833 the British government decided to finally do away with the Honorable East India Company's monopoly on the opium trade. Now everybody wanted a piece of the action.
Property of Britain.
And opium started flowing into China completely unregulated, increasing supply, driving prices down, and making the substance even
Rated E for no.
more accessible. By 1839, nearly 5,639,000 pounds of opium would be pouring into China every year. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because it's not like the Chinese were just sitting around letting this happen. As piles of money which the government desperately needed flowed out of the country, the emperor appointed an official named Lin Zexu to address the disastrous
Anti-Opium Task Force.
effects of opium on the country. He was brilliant, incorruptible, and utterly inflexible.
Nice.
He saw the threat of the West and the morally corrupting effect that opium had had on the Chinese people, and decided that the only approach to take was the complete removal of opium from China. By March of 1839, he had reached Canton. It was the source of all this opium, so he planned to cut it off at its source. His actions were swift and uncompromising.
I will bring this down. I believe you.
He arrested thousands of Chinese opium traders, forced addicts into rehabilitation programs,
Well, at least he's given them rehab. That's nice.
confiscated opium pipes, and closed opium dens. And then he took on the Western traders. At first, he wrote an open letter to Queen Victoria, appealing to her conscience, a letter which it's very likely she never received. When he got no reply, he demanded that the foreigners surrender their stores of opium. The foreign merchants stalled and prevaricated, giving up small amounts of their opium stock, but nowhere near what Lin Zexu had demanded. So he marshaled the troops and put the foreign warehouses to siege. The merchants holed up for a month and a half, but in the end they gave in, and were forced to surrender 21,000 chests of opium.
Damn.
For the next 23 days, Zexu burned the opium with lye. This was a king's ransom in opium. The amount of money this destruction
Very large
represented
number.
is staggering. It was roughly 1/6 as much as the British Empire, the largest, most far-flung empire in the world, had spent on its military the previous year. Needless to say, everybody involved was going bankrupt. Now, there is some debate over whether the Chinese offered tea in exchange for the surrendered opium, but what is certain is that the merchants never received any tea, and instead the local chief superintendent of British trade, one Captain Charles Elliot, promised the merchants that the British government would cover their losses if they would leave peacefully. Which, of course, the British government absolutely refused to do. The outcry over this illegal seizure of British goods began to grow. Meanwhile, back in China, a reprehensible incident occurred where some drunken British sailors beat a man to death.
Oh.
Lin Zexu demanded the execution of a British sailor in recompense. Captain Elliot, who actually disliked the opium trade and was somewhat sympathetic to the Chinese situation, put out a reward for evidence of who had committed the murder, and gave money to the victim's family. He then had the criminals tried on his ship, inviting Lin Zexu or a representative to witness the proceedings, although none took him up on the invitation. He sentenced the men to hard labor back in England. But this wouldn't work for Lin Zexu. After all, the whole point of his demand was to show that foreigners couldn't just violate Chinese law on Chinese soil. So in response, he stopped all food being supplied to the British and posted signs telling them that frothier water sources had been poisoned. Next, he ordered the Portuguese to eject all British from Macau. He was going to see these pesky British and their drugs off Chinese soil once and for all. So the British retreated to a barren nothing island off the coast. A barren nothing island that will eventually be known as Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Their food crisis was at a head, though. Captain Elliot sent a request for food sales to resume. The response was delayed, so he sent men ashore to buy food. But as they were heading back, these provisions were seized by Chinese officials. Soon, a firefight broke out between the blockading Chinese junks and the British ships. And thus began the First Opium War.
Ooh, that was a good episode. Still not as entertaining as some other series. That was a really good. That was a well-paced episode. I'm happy with this. I don't know where to rank it though. I'm trying to remember really how much I enjoyed. It's hard to. All the series start to blend together once you've watched so many of them. But yeah, that was the First Opium War, The Righteous Minister Extra History number 2 by Extra Credits. I've got nothing to add here at the end. This was well done. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.